She's giving me.
Oh, okay.
All right, if we can have you come on up here to the witness box. We'll have you actually step on into it. But then once you're in it, rather than sit, if you could just stand and get as close to the microphone as possible, and my clerk will give you an oath.
Okay. I'll have you please raise your right hand. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, you may be seated. And you can go ahead and take off your mask. And then, because we're being recorded, I'll ask you to scooch up a little closer to the microphone, and you can move it as well. And then I'll ask you to please state and spell your first and last name.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Please state and spell your first and last name.
Barbara Dawson, Barbara Dawson.
All right, and Ms. Dawson, there is water there if you want some.
Thank you.
And then whenever defense is ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. Dawson. We've talked before, is that right?
Yes.
For about 15 years, did you own a cooking store here in Oregon?
Yes, I did.
And where was that?
The main location was in the Pearl District, and we also had another location later in Lake Oswego.
What was the name of that store?
In Good Taste.
And do you know the woman sitting next to me?
I do.
And how do you know her?
The first time I met her, she catered our wedding. And, you know, in the culinary world in Portland, we bumped into each other a few times. But later, her husband came and worked for me part-time at the cooking school, and then she joined and helped as well.
Okay. So well, first of all, you're talking about Dan Brophy, who...
Right.
Okay, and what would Dan do at your cooking store?
He was one of our culinary instructors. It was a cooking school for foodies, not career-based cooking school, and he came and taught cooking classes for our clients that came.
How frequently would he teach these classes?
It depended, but I'd say a couple of times a month.
Okay, and did you also have these boot camps? What were they?
Yes, we had boot camps, which were hands-on cooking classes that would span a week, where people would come in and actually really learn hands-on how to cook.
And so did you compensate Mr. Brophy for teaching these classes?
Yes.
And so he taught a couple of classes a week, or did you say a month?
A month.
Okay, at one of your stores, but he also would teach these week-long boot camps?
Right.
And each time he would get paid by you for his efforts?
Yes.
And you said that your store closed. Was that in 2015? Do you remember?
Yes, it was 2015.
Okay. So prior to that, had Dan been teaching at your store for what, about 10 years?
Yes.
And he would have had a second income provided by your store during that period?
Yes.
But that would have ended in 2015?
Yes.
From time to time, would Nancy help Dan when he would come teach these classes?
Yes, definitely, especially when we did the week-long boot camps. She was one of the co-instructors. We always had two instructors in the boot camp, and she was one of them.
Can you describe what you observed regarding their working relationship?
They worked together very well. You could tell they'd cooked together a lot in the kitchen. They worked very harmoniously together.
Okay. They had different personalities.
Oh, yes.
Describe Dan's.
Dan was very serious, very task-driven, trying to get everything ready. He was a great chef and a good instructor, but he was very much more focused on the cooking and getting the job done. Nancy was definitely much more outgoing. She spent more time with the students, really encouraged them, and made them feel very good about what they were working on.
Did they complement each other?
Absolutely. They were a good pair working together, very collaborative.
Okay. Was there an intuitive quality to their work together?
Yes, definitely. She was, they both didn't have to really talk too much about what came next. They knew what came next. They really sensed the next step, and it was really fun to watch them working together in the kitchen.
And what kind of reviews did the people who paid for those classes provide to them?
They got very positive reviews. You know, clearly both of them had been well trained. Nancy had had a catering company, and Dan taught at a culinary school as well. And they got very good reviews, and very positive. People felt that they were learning a lot from both of them.
If your store hadn't closed in 2015, would you have kept employing Dan Brophy?
Absolutely.
And you may or may not have personal knowledge. Do you know whether Dan did those sort of side instruction jobs for other cooking classes or other cooking schools in Portland?
I don't know.
Okay. I have no other questions. Thank you. I was hoping you would say jollied him along because that was a phrase you'd used before that I liked, but we missed it. Thank you.
Thank you.
She,
Cro-
well, hang on, she might have some
Oh,
over there.
sorry.
Right.
Okay.
All right, no cross-examination. Is this witness excused?
Yes, Your Honor, and
All
thank
right.
you.
Thank you.
And Ms. Dawson, if you could just put your mask back on. Thank you.
No, I mean, we're missing all the things that you.
Your Honor, we might need
Need to take a short break just to make sure that the state has everything that we're gonna cover with the next witness.
All right. How long a break do we need?
Oh, I would think probably just 5 minutes.
All right. Let's take a 5-minute break then.
want to stick her?
All right, please be seated. Before we move on to the next matter, I do want to say, at the conclusion of the last witness's testimony, Ms. Maxfield, after questions were done and answers were given, you made a statement, and I'd appreciate you not doing that. You actually made a statement about something the witness may have said before. I didn't quite catch it, but let's leave this to questions and answers and not commentary.
Fine, Your Honor.
All right, now with that, do we have any issues with the next witness before the next witness takes the stand?
I don't think so, Your Honor. We were missing some exhibits, but we appear to have them all now.
All right, in that case, let's bring the jury back. And who is the defense next witness?
Your Honor, the defense recalls Josiah Roloff.
Okay. And Mr. Roloff, will have you just step back into the same spot, and we will swear you in again.
Please raise your right hand. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Okay, then you may be seated and you may remove your mask.
And I actually, we won't have you respell your name since it's already in the record. But I will have you state it just to make sure the jury heard it.
Sure. It's Josiah Roloff.
All right, and then when defense is ready?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Roloff, you testified last week by WebEx.
Yes.
Right. You have been working with us on this case for quite some time, have you not?
Yes.
And last week you explained to the jury what your credentials are and that you're employed as a digital forensic examiner.
Yes.
Did we give you a variety of tasks and assignments in this case?
Quite a few.
Was there quite a bit of digital evidence to review?
There was.
I'm going to take you through today some of those things that are pertinent to testimony that's already been offered in the trial, so that you can explain to the the jury what you found, where you found, and how you were able to identify whether or not that was evidence that in fact was found on one of the Brophy's digital devices, and just explain a little bit about that process, okay?
Certainly. Okay.
Now, I think it's a little bit inevitable that we're going to jump around because there was so much digital evidence and this has been such a long trial. But I think what I'd like to start with is there are some of the things that you looked at were emails,
Yes.
some were voicemails,
Yes.
some had to do with the phone data that we've been referring to as CSLI, the location data.
Yes.
Did you also find some things that were just on the devices? They weren't voicemails, they weren't Gmails, they weren't from those phone records, but just pieces of evidence that were on one or more of the devices?
Yes. There were a number of different records, documents, things like that, different files that were located on the computers, for example, versus a cell phone.
Okay. I want to start with the ones that don't neatly fit into any other category. If that's all right with you. Mr. Breton, would you pull up 203, and we're going to want to go to 203.2 as well. Now, did we ask you to identify, to locate on the computer a letter that Nancy Brophy had written to Dan Brophy?
Yes.
And that's a letter that we've been referring to as the Dearest Dan letter.
Yes.
Were you in fact able to locate that on one of the computers?
On two different devices, yes.
Okay. Mr. Breton, thank you. So which devices did you find that on?
So there's two versions of this document. The content is the same. There's just a little bit of metadata that's different based on when the document was placed on each device. But the first device that was identified is a Lexar thumb drive. The document was found on that device.
And the second?
The second was the Toshiba laptop.
All right.
I'm
And
sorry,
just in case.
the HP laptop that happened to have a Toshiba hard drive inside of it.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Just in case somebody in the jury is not familiar with the term metadata, could you just give kind of a brief overview of what you're talking about when you discuss metadata?
Certainly. So metadata is simply just data about something. So in the case of an electronic file, you may have data such as a Word document that has text in it. But the metadata about that document is going to be the document's file name, when it was created, when it was last printed, its file path, so where it lies on an electronic medium.
So is it safe to say that the metadata is everything but the content?
I think that is fair to say, yes.
All right, so with respect to this particular letter that Nancy Brophy wrote to Dan Brophy, what were you able to determine about when that document was first created?
So for Word documents, there's a couple of different types of metadata to consider. The first is the internal metadata. So when a Word document's generated, there's internal information stored within that document that says this document was created on this date at this time. And so in this case, for both devices, or both versions of the document found on the two devices, we can see that there is an internal metadata created date of August 3rd. Just got blown up there. Of August 3rd, 2015.
Okay. And were there also edits made? Were you able to tell a little bit more about the process of the creation of that document?
Yeah, so in addition to that, there is internal information showing the last modified date and time. So the last time something changed with the content of the file. And that was August 18th of 2015.
Okay. Um, Is there anything else particularly significant about the creation of that document that you found? And I don't know that there was. I just don't want to move on to the next exhibit if there's something else that you think is noteworthy about that particular exhibit and what you found in the metadata.
Just what was significant to me in trying to understand all the paths a document's gone through in its creation and movement is just I noted that the file system creation date for this document was May 13th of 2016, which means it was moved from somewhere on that date to this thumb drive.
Okay, and what about on the HP laptop?
So on the HP laptop, the internal metadata is all consistent with what we see on the Lexar thumb drive, meaning nothing about that file has changed. But the file system created date, so when this laptop first saw this file, when it was transferred to the laptop hard drive, was January 20th of 2017.
All right. Anything else about that?
No, I don't believe so.
Let's turn then to Exhibit 212. And Mr. Breton, I want you just to display the very top of that, not any of the actual substantive content of the exhibit. Do you have the whole box up? You might need to show just a little teeny bit more than that. Okay. Now, Mr. Roloff, I'm going to bring you a hard copy of this one as well, so that you can look at the substance without us displaying it. Can you tell us what that is?
Yes, it's a message thread, an iMessage thread between two people, between Dan and Nancy Brophy. This message thread was taken from Dan Brophy's iPhone.
Okay. And when does that message thread begin? What's the date range of those messages?
The very first message is April 15th of 2016.
And what about the very last one?
It's June 2nd of 2018.
All right. And when you created that exhibit 212, did you capture all of the messages that were exchanged between Dan Brophy and Nancy Brophy using those two phone numbers?
Yes.
I'd like to do the same thing with exhibit 213. Tab, so 213 should be this section there. No, I think that's just.
Sorry.
Okay. Mr. Britton, would you do the same thing with 213? Just show that very top block. So what is in 213?
It's similar to 212 in the sense that it's an iMessage thread, also taken from Dan Brophy's iPhone. It is between two parties, Dan Brophy's cell phone number and a contact by the name of Nathaniel in that phone number.
All right. And what was the start date of that thread?
April 16th of 2016,
And what was the very last message in that thread?
May 20th of 2018.
All right. And again, when you captured that to create this exhibit, what's now exhibit 213, did you endeavor to capture every single text message that was exchanged between those two phones?
Yes.
Right. Mr. Breton, would you pull up exhibit 300? All right. What are we looking at here?
This is a contact entry that was found on Dan Brophy's iPhone.
Right. So is that something, I take it from the way you described it, that's actually something that would have shown up in his contacts on the phone?
Correct. So for the two phone numbers you see here, these were added to the contact list or the address book. You can see Nancy Brophy's phone number in here as one of the phone numbers that ends in the 5612. Then you can see the contact name, which is Nancy, the love of my life, as the name for the contact.
And with iPhones, and I take it Dan Brophy had an iPhone?
Yes.
Okay, so when his wife called him, when Nancy called him from that number, is that would display on the screen of his phone?
It would, from either of those numbers.
Thank you. So let's go to a couple of emails that have been discussed during the trial. I think the first is Mr. Breton, Exhibit 209. And does that include a metadata page? So, Mr. Roloff, were you able to locate this email within Nancy Brophy's email account?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And were you able to ascertain the date on which these emails were exchanged, or the date range? It's obviously a series of emails back and forth.
Yes, this would be considered an email thread where there's multiple emails that are going back and forth on different dates. And yes, the dates are embedded within this document.
Okay, and are the dates that are displayed in the text, the part that the rest of us can see and read easily, are those accurate as compared to the metadata?
As far as I can tell, yes. I mean, those dates are stamped by the different email clients that are receiving and or sending. I didn't see anything that led me to believe they were incorrect.
Okay, so the date shown in that email there is actually the date that you were able to determine Nancy Brophy would have received that email?
Yes.
What? You know, I'm sorry, I can't read it from here. So May 25th of 2018 is the date on which she received that email.
The last one, yes.
Thank you. There's another email, Mr. Breton, at Exhibit 363. And that appears to be from eBay.
Yes.
Mr. Breton, can you go through that so we can see the dates? That may just be a single email. And then, were you able to find this within Ms. Brophy's email account?
Yes, I was.
And again, did you compare the metadata and the digital information available to you to confirm that the dates that are shown in that email, in fact, or the exchange of emails are correct?
Yes, I found nothing that demonstrated that they were incorrect.
All right, and then the last email I want to look at is what we have as Defense 312. This is an email on June 6th of 2018, and it appears to be with somebody whose email nickname is B. Sunder.
Yes.
Were you able with this one as well to determine that in fact the date that's shown on that is accurate and that the email was drawn up by Nancy Brophy on her computer within her Gmail account?
I can determine that this email was created on that date and sent from this email account, not necessarily who was using the email account at that time.
Sure, but from that account.
Yes.
Okay. And did that email get delivered successfully?
It didn't appear to.
Okay. But you were able to see that there was an attempt to deliver it on that date?
There were numerous errors essentially that were returned for this email, saying that it was delayed, that it wasn't able to be delivered, and I believe ultimately there was an email stating that it failed to be delivered.
All right. Okay. So let's now talk about a couple of voicemails. I think there are three that I'd like to go through with you. The first, Mr. Breton, is Exhibit 307. A voicemail in February of 28th of 2018 at 12:19 p.m. Were you able to determine, first of all, which device was this voicemail found on?
Dan Brophy's iPhone.
Okay. And were you able to ascertain that that was the correct time?
That is the time and the date that was stamped on that voicemail, yes.
Okay. And Mr. Breton, you don't need to play the whole thing, but would you just play just a little bit of it so we'll recognize it later?
Nancy, it's Carol Stewart.
Okay.
And my
Thank you. All right, now let's go to Exhibit 207. heard this one before, so we don't need to play it in its entirety either.
Hey, we made it. This has turned out to be a really fun little group, and we're staying.
Thank you. So with respect to this voicemail 207, do you have the metadata, Mr. Breton? Can you go to that page? And which device did you find this on?
On Dan Brophy's iPhone.
And at what time did he receive that voicemail? What date and time?
He received the voicemail May 4th, 2018 at 7:51 p.m.
And were you able to determine whether that in fact went through successfully?
The voicemail existed on his phone, so it was delivered successfully.
Had to have been. Okay, thank you. And then the last voicemail is 221, Mr. Breton. We've heard this one before too, so I
Dan, it's Maxine. I just saw the news alert. Do you know what happened?
Can you go to the metadata page of this exhibit, please? And again, I believe you said that you found that on Dan Brophy's phone.
I did find this on Dan Brophy's phone, yes.
And what was the time and the date?
June 2nd, 2018 at 9:53 a.m.
So I think the other projects that we asked you to take on were in relation to some exhibits and some testimony that was presented in the state's case. Did you have an opportunity to listen to some of your counterparts who testified for the state in this prosecution?
Yes.
Did we ask you to look a little bit into State's Exhibit 82 and see whether you could kind of round that out and add a little bit more to that exhibit?
Yes, you asked me to look at the any context kind of surrounding those entries. Yes.
Okay. Let's, Mr. Breton, if you could bring up 339. Now, how did you go about doing that? State's Exhibit 82 was a fairly long exhibit, and it essentially, could you describe what the purpose, first of all, of State's 82 was, just so the jury remembers which one that is and what we're talking about?
Sure. So the State's Exhibit 82 had a number of different internet website accesses that took place, different searches that were conducted. And what we focused on, or what you asked me to focus on, were various searches, as well as some YouTube videos that appeared to have potentially been accessed.
Okay. So what are we looking at on this first page?
So page 1 at the very top where it says on 1/31/2018, that first paragraph is just taken from State's Exhibit 82. So that's what exists in the government's exhibit. And then below it is a screen capture of that activity with potentially some additional activity that was created by using a number of different digital forensic tools to essentially parse the internet activity on this device.
Okay, are you referring to a part of the screen that we can't see right now? Do you want us to scroll down, or is that all?
Nope, it's
captured?
all here. It's the picture that starts with www.youtube.com. And then on the right-hand side of that, there's more of a description. So you're going to see things like Chrome web visits, Chrome web history. And then as we go all the way over to the right-hand side, you're going to see a date and a timestamp for that entry. So when this activity occurred. One thing to keep in mind as we look at this is our web browsers, when we're browsing the World Wide Web, it documents what it is that we're doing. And it does it in a number of different ways to include a textual manner like this. And so at times you're going to see entries that are duplicated. And that's because these web browsers are notating in logs, in different logs, the same information. So for example, on this first page here, although there's a number of entries that exist, it's really only for 3 activities. So the very first activity that we see at the top is an access to youtube.com. That happened on January 31st, 2018 at 5:29 and 27 seconds. And then you have a little, 9 seconds later, you have a search that was conducted on YouTube.com. That search was for Ghost Guns Glock 19. And you'll see that a number of entries after that all have the exact same timestamp. That's just because this entry was put in multiple locations. So that's all related to the same activity. And then 4 seconds after that, you're going to have a YouTubeTV.com URL link that is related to, it looks like a video, get accessed. So 4 seconds after the search was done, a link was clicked that should have led to a video.
And can you tell whether the video was in fact watched?
You can't from these artifacts if it was actually watched. You can tell it was accessed, and you can also look and see what happens after the access takes place. And so sometimes that can give you an idea of how long a person could have been on that page watching that video.
And I take it from that the presumption is if there's other activity later, you can determine whether that's activity that would preclude a continuation of the first activity. In other words, some activity would stop. If somebody started to watch a video, but then you see something else happen a minute later, you can tell sometimes that that other activity would mean that the video then stopped and the user's gone on to something else.
Yeah, that deduction can be made at times, yes.
Okay. So for this particular one, can you tell whether all of that relates to looking at that video or searching for that video a single time, even though there are all those different entries there?
Yes, it was just for a single time.
Okay. So basically the data, the logging was kind of moving around within the computer, but that was the computer talking to itself, not actual accessing or something that Nancy Brophy or the user of the computer would have done.
The computer or its applications, just notating what the user's done, really so that if the user wants to go back to the same or similar sites later, it has an idea of things it might suggest, for example. The other thing that we're seeing here at times are a digital forensic tool's interpretation of data. So there's multiple reasons why we end up with duplicate entries here at times. So it's important to look at those timestamps and understand the context here.
Okay, so what were you able to determine about this video and whether in fact it was viewed, and if so, how long?
There was no activity after this, or at least immediately after this. It was many hours later. So the video could have been watched in its entirety. I don't know. There was nothing to assist with that other than the lack of additional information and activity.
Okay. Now, did we also ask you to actually locate the videos?
Yes.
And were you able to locate this particular video?
No, I was not. It's no longer available.
And is that somewhat unusual, or are you typically would you expect to be able to find a video out on the web if you could find the artifacts of it on a computer?
Not necessarily. Things get taken down. Sometimes they're not preserved in different archive systems that exist online. So it's not abnormal, but the videos do exist on the next page. So as a contrast, I believe we only had one video that was missing out of all the videos we looked at.
Okay. All right. But did you do a fairly extensive search looking for it? Are you pretty comfortable saying that this, in fact, is not available now on the internet?
At least in a manner that I could identify it as being this video. I was unable to find anything that led me to believe that it was the same video.
Okay. All right. Let's go to the next page. So this page refers to at least one other video that was accessed. Is that correct? And do you need to see down further on the page for this to make sense?
I don't, not yet. So this relates to 4 other videos being accessed. So what we have here, at the very top, again, this is being taken from the government's States Exhibit 82. So that text and that paragraph is just a copy from their exhibit. And then below, where you start seeing that youtube.com in yellow again, this is what I created about everything else that I could see taking place after that search had occurred. And so what we can see here is that on March 11th at 2018 at 3:25 and 7 seconds, youtube.com is accessed. A number of seconds later at 3:25 and 35 seconds, a search is conducted for cleaning a Glock 17. You'll see a number of other entries there for youtube.com and the same search query, but all of those are related to the same initial search query. That's not in addition. And then after that search is conducted, you see less than 10 seconds later, the first YouTube video link is accessed.
Okay, so again, even though there are multiple entries on this page, were your findings that essentially this particular video was only accessed and viewed on one occasion?
Yes.
And, and what's the name of this video? I know we're going to talk about 4 on this page, but which one are we talking about right now?
So I will have to scroll down here to see the name. So for the very first video, the title for it was Glock 17 Gen 4 Detail Strip Disassembly Clean and Lube Assembly.
And I see there's a date there, but that looks like the date on which the video itself was created and not the date that it was viewed.
That is the date it was posted to YouTube.
Okay,
And to the right of that is the duration of the video. So for the first video, it was posted September 8th of 2011, and the duration is 7 minutes and 21 seconds.
okay. So was this a video that was viewed on, well, let me orient you again to the device. Which device did you find this on, or where did the searching occur?
This was on the HP laptop.
And did it appear to you from the data that was available to you whether the person, the user of the HP laptop, had actually viewed this particular video?
They had accessed the website that had this video, and that access went on for enough period of time that they could have seen part of this video.
And how long? Were you able to see how long it appeared it might have been? I mean, obviously somebody can get up and walk away from a computer at any time, but if you assume the user was engaged actively, how long does it appear that video might have been watched?
It was about 49 seconds before the next video was played.
Okay. So, Mr. Breton, would you play 325, Defense Exhibit 325? You have a timer.
Okay.
We can just do it with the
Oh, we
second
can
hand.
see it there. Okay, I see.
Let's
We have
start
an
over.
old-fashioned clock. I think that was a little bit over 49 seconds. So did you find any indication, take that one down? Did you find any indication, can we go back, I didn't mean take it down, I meant go back to the 339. Page 2, I think is where we were. Thank you. Did you find any indication that that video that we just watched was then watched again by the user of that computer?
No.
So what, you said there was another video that started about 49 seconds into that?
Yes, so again, looking at the top portion of the screen here, just like with the other web access artifacts, there are duplicate entries here. So you'll see that although there are a total, I believe, of 8 different entries related to YouTube videos, it's really related to 4 videos because there's duplicates for each one. So the very first one we just saw a portion played at 3:25 and 42 seconds. The next video starts playing, or the page that has that video is at 3:26 and 31 seconds.
Okay, and again, next to that one, this top 10 things you didn't know about the Glock, that was posted to YouTube, I take it, on December 17th of 2016, but that's not the date that you found it was actually viewed or played on that computer?
That's correct.
Were you able to determine that that one was played on the computer?
I was able to determine that this page was accessed that has this video.
Okay, and what was the next activity? What can you tell us? I know you can't tell us dispositively how long it was watched, but what does that next activity tell you about how long this might have been watched?
So there was no activity until 3:32 and 42 seconds.
And did you do the math? Can you tell me?
Yeah,
what
it's
that
about
is?
6 minutes.
Okay. All right, Mr. Breton, that is Exhibit 342. Can you play that one, please?
Glock pistols are often known for their polymer frames and what's referred to as a safe action trigger. And Glock has produced a series of polymer frame semi-automatic pistols designed and produced by Glock Guess MBH in Deutschwarm, Austria. The Glock 17 was the first pistol produced by Glock, and despite the fear of the plastic gun of the early 80s, it became Austria's new military police handgun in 1982. So we're going to take a look at 10 things you probably didn't know about this awesome handgun, the Glock 17. Number 1, today 65% of U.S. law enforcement agencies use the Glock 17. More so, there are military and police forces throughout the entire planet with over 60 countries using the Glock 17 as their military sidearm. And not to mention all the aspects of selling these firearms to civilians for personal defense. And ultimately what you have is you have one of the most used sidearms on the planet, the Glock 17. Number 2, the inventor of Glock 17, Gaston Glock, was never a gun manufacturer at all. As a matter of fact, he was a chemical engineer, and what he specialized was a process called ferric nitrocarbonizing, which essentially pulled nitrogens and carbons out of any substance to really greatly harden it. Now, ferric nitrocarbonizing was originally invented in England, and it was done to harden steels for extreme breakage in pistons and engine blocks and that sort of thing. So Gaston Glock used this technology to produce rods and knives for the Austrian military out of his garage. Number 3, in 1980, Gaston Glock bought an injection molding machine, and he was the first to mold plastics and use this ferric nitrocarbonizing on polymers. And that's how he sustained such a tough, hard polymer, was through this process. And he was the first one to do that. Some of his earliest employees were actually camera manufacturers that used this plastic molding process to design camera parts. In 1980, Austria announced that it would be seeking tenders to replace the Walther P38 as their military and police sidearm. However, Austria was using a ridiculous testing process. This testing process that they were using really challenged some of the major gun manufacturers of its time. But Gaston Glock believed he was up for the challenge with his polymer products. Besides a long list these guns must have, to include it had to be a 9mm, a 9+ capacity, and had to be no more than 58 parts in the components. But the testing process also included no more than 20 malfunctions in 10,000 rounds. More so, at 15,000 rounds, they would inject a highly pressurized 9mm parabellum upwards of 73,000 psi, double the maximum pressure limit for a 9mm. And after that, it still had to be a perfectly usable pistol. So Glock put his team of chemists and camera makers together, and they created the Glock 17. And of course, as you know, when all was said and done, it was the Glock 17 that came out on top. Number 5, a lot of people think that Glock 17 is called the Glock 17 because it was the 17th design. That is not accurate. It is the 17th patent that Glock held. Earlier patents were things like rods and knives and camera parts. But the Glock 17 was the very first gun that Glock produced. Number 6, many people don't realize the guns that Glock outperformed in that high-stress Austrian military test. On that massive list is the H&K P7M8, the P7M13, and the P9S. Also, Sig Sauer at the time was out of Switzerland. They put in the P220 and the P226 as their contenders. Also on that list was Beretta out of Italy. They put in the 92 SBF. FN Herstal inserted the Browning High Power and Steyr Mannlicher the GB. These are all outstanding guns, and the Glock 17, the very first gun that Gaston Glock produced, blew them all out of the water. Number 7, in 1985, the U.S. Department of Defense was seeking a new sidearm to replace the 1911. They invited Glock to bring their Glock 17 to this testing. However, Glock declined their offer simply because the Department of Defense had a ridiculous retooling request on these guns. More so, they wanted 35 samples in a really short period of time, and not only could Glock not retool in that short a time, but quite honestly, they didn't have any interest in it, so they politely declined. If it wasn't for this, I believe the Glock 17 would have blown the 92 away, and Beretta would not be manufacturing our sidearm, it would be Glock. Number 8, later that same year, Sweden and Norwegian testing took place over the Glock 17 to replace their military sidearms. Now the reason that's of particular interest is they use NATO standards for testing, so when they were finished, this Glock 17 received a NATO classified sidearm, so therefore any NATO country can use the Glock 17 as their sidearm. And of course many do. Number 9, the Glock 17 was not the first polymer-framed striker-fired pistol. In fact, in 1970, H&K had a polymer-framed striker-fired pistol. But even earlier, in 1907, it was Ross Steyr who invented the very first striker-fired pistol, the 7.65 millimeter Ross Steyr 1907. And finally, number 10, the Glock 17 uses a modified Browning cam lock system for charging and recharging a semi-auto system, adapted from the high-power pistols. So there you go, there's your top 10 list. Ultimately what you have is you have a gun that takes some design from Browning and Steyr, and you put together a chemical engineer and a bunch of camera manufacturers, and what you have is the Glock 17. If you like this video, click like and subscribe. You can also now find us on Facebook.
Right, so it appears that video was watched in its entirety, or at least there's nothing on the computer to indicate that that was interrupted as it was playing.
It could have been, yes.
Okay, Mr. Breton, can we go back to 339, the one with the text? Great, thank you. So what happened after that? Was there additional user activity?
There is. So there's a third video that was accessed.
And then this was immediately afterwards?
This is the transition from the other video that we just watched. So this access happens at 3:32 and 42 seconds.
And how long did that last? How long did it appear that video had been accessed and potentially viewed?
Just about 2 minutes.
All right. That, Mr. Britton, I believe is 340. Yes.
Hey folks, I have something really cool here, and you don't get to see this very often. And it probably will come as no surprise, since I will probably name the video what it is. It is a Glock Cutaway. Now these are primarily reserved for law enforcement and for Glock instructors, but I got one because, I think I've probably said this a time or two, it's an understatement, I am writing a Glock book and I needed pictures of it, so they sent me one. It's on temporary loan from Glock. Here's a little bit closer view. This is a Glock 17. They do have a few different models of it. It comes Glock 19, and I'm not sure if like the 26, I'm not sure if it comes in that, but they have a few different models. They also have different generations. This is a Gen 4, but I have seen Gen 3 and Gen 2 and Gen 1. Get a good look at the interior of the magazine. Now these are serial numbered, just like a firearm. These do count as firearms, even though you can't fire them. I had to have it transferred just as a standard firearm and everything else. So now my camera screen that I'm looking at is on the left hand side of my camera. I need to be on the right hand side to operate this efficiently, but I'm going to try to stay on the left side here. But I kind of want to show you some of the different components here. This of course is the barrel.
That's about 2 minutes, you know. And did it appear that that video might have been watched in its entirety, or did something happen about 2 minutes into it that suggested new activity?
There was a transition to another video.
All right, let's go back to 339 then, so we can figure out what that was.
So at 3:34 and 44 seconds, there was a fourth video accessed.
And what's the name of that fourth video?
It's Glock's official recommended cleaning and inspection.
And again, that shows a posting date in 2016, but this, as I understand your testimony, followed immediately after viewing these others.
Yes.
And what was the view time, as best you could determine from the data available to you, for this last Glock's official recommended cleaning and inspection?
Yeah, it was less than 4 minutes.
Okay. Were you able to find this one?
I was, and the duration of this on YouTube is 25 minutes and 3 seconds.
Okay, but it was 4 minutes, you said, that was viewed?
Less than 4 minutes, just a little over 3.
Okay. So, Mr. Britton, would you pull up and begin to play Exhibit 341?
There's 150 videos on how to clean your Glock. And I've cleaned Glocks in many different ways over the past 20 years. But what I decided to do is go and look at the official way that Glock says to clean your pistol. And so what we're going to do is go through each of the steps that Glock says. This is not necessarily what I'm recommending, but it's what Glock officially says. And you can take it from there. In fact, there is a little bit of leeway here and there with solvents and oil, but Glock is pretty particular about certain points. And so we're going to look at each of the ways, not only to clean, but to also lube, and then to do the Glock inspection of your pistol. This to me is very helpful for new gun owners, but even us old salty guys that are old Glock fans can learn a thing or two. We're going to be using the Glock 26, but this applies to all models of Glock, no matter what caliber, no matter what frame size. Now here are the items that I have for the cleaning project. I have a cleaning rod and of course a jag for patches and a bore brush. You can use a bore snake as well. And then we have a toothbrush of some sort. This is definitely for gun cleaning. I have some Q-tips, and these are just long, but you can use standard regular Q-tips, patches, a little bit of gun lube, some solvent, and a rag, and something to put it on, at least something you don't want to harm, like a kitchen table. You want to have something you want to put down. This is just a little Lyman cleaning pad or station. So first thing we're going to do, we have the magazine out. We're going to double check, make sure the gun is unloaded. Visually checking the chamber, and we can see that it is clear. One of the things I want to note before we get started is, I know a lot of guys on YouTube, we do this a lot, checking our guns, and it's very important you get in that habit. It's a discipline that you really need to do. More gun accidents happen when you're cleaning your gun, because a lot of people feel like the gun's unloaded, they've removed the magazine, and there's one in the chamber, and there you go. So first and foremost, definitely check your firearm. Next, we're going to disassemble, so pointing it in a safe direction, pull the trigger, pull down on your tabs about Glock says 1/10 of an inch, and then it just comes right off. And we're going to separate our recoil spring guide rod and our barrel. There are 4 parts to your Glock pistol: your slide, your frame, your barrel, and your recoil spring. Your magazine, we're going to also take a look at that as well, but these are the main 4 parts that you're cleaning. We're going to start with the barrel, and of course that gets the most dirt and grime and of course lead buildup and powder and all that kind of stuff. Now we've got a bore brush on our rod, and we always go from the breech end first. You don't want to nick the front of your barrel, the muzzle of your barrel. And we're going to take, this is dry, and we're just going to kind of clean out all the fouling. Go through about 6, 7 to 10 times, just according to what your preference is, according to how dirty it is. Okay, once you get that clean, you can just kind of inspect to see where you are. Now we're going to take off the brush, slide your patch through. We're using some Hops No. 9 solvent. I've been using this stuff for 30 years. It's great stuff. You don't want to get too much of the solvent on your patch.
So wringing it out some is smart. We're going to take this and just run it through.
I think that's about 4 minutes if I counted right. So, thank you. So were there any other videos that were watched, viewed on that computer on that date?
No.
Was there activity of significance immediately after that?
There was it would appear to be a banking website that was accessed.
Okay, so complete change of subject matter.
Yes.
Okay. What about, were there other videos that were referenced in States Exhibit 82 that you were able to locate?
At least some search queries if we move down to the next page here.
And before we get off those other videos, did you find evidence that those particular videos were watched again on other dates?
No.
So that any duplication of entries there were just the computer sort of generating additional reporting about the same activity, the same view session?
Yes.
All right, what were you just about to say about this one? Sorry.
I'm not sure what this is right here. This is.
You want to go down another page?
It looks backwards. It looks Chinese.
Yeah, actually that does. Something's wrong. That got flipped.
That looks much better.
What are we looking at on this page?
So again, at the top is the information that was taken from States Exhibit 82, where there was an entry on March 26, 2018 at 10:13 and 36 seconds a.m. For a search query that had the verbiage cleaning a Glock 17. And so when looking at this in the full context of what's taking place on the device at this time, this doesn't appear to be related to a user action. It's just information that's being synchronized by the browser related to prior activities. So you can see that this information and the next set of information is all happening within 1 second of each other. And there's a number of events happening all at this next 1 second, which is 10, 13, and 36 seconds. That again is part of a synchronization that's taking place in the browser cache. And if we go down to the next page, you'll see that. And as you can see on this page, these entries would indicate that a lot of different videos and searches are all happening at the exact same moment. Every single one of these entries is March 26, 2018 at 10:13 and 36 seconds. That would not be possible. And also, if you look at the synchronization history for this browser, there is a synchronization taking place. So again, this is an automated process that's taking place. This is not related to a user actually visiting every single one of these websites, videos, or entering these search terms in at this time.
So when you use the term synchronization, is that something that could apply in an instance where somebody, for instance, got a new laptop or a new device and they were trying to migrate data from one to the other? Or what would synchronization potentially mean in that context where you see that variety of activity happening just simultaneously?
Yeah, it could be that. It could be a new laptop, a new device. It could be turning back on essentially the synchronization of your profile within the Chrome web browser. There's a lot of different reasons why you might see a synchronization of web activity happen. Those would be some general ones.
Okay. So let's continue to go down through 339 and let us know when we get to the end of that synchronization if there is something else that you found. Was that it with respect to States 82?
It is, yes. It ends on the very next page right there.
Okay, and is that all a part of that synchronization log that you were just describing?
Yes.
Right through the end of the exhibit there?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so the other two things that I'd like to review with you both fall into the category of CSLI, and those, as you've explained earlier, come from the phone data, correct?
Well, not necessarily the phone data. It comes from the cellular service providers.
Okay, well, but I guess I'm conflating the two. So why don't you explain that? Let's reorient me and the jury as to what CSLI is, how you develop that data, and then we can talk about how you applied it here.
Sure. So we talk about this kind of shorthand as CSLI, but that stands for cell site location information. And this is information that our cellular service providers are creating and maintaining based on our phones' interactions with their networks, with their cell towers. And so this information can tell us when a call, a text message, or a data transmission occurs, which cell tower was responsible for the transfer of that information. At times, what side of the cell tower was responsible for that transaction. And then we have one other little data set that can be provided at times that relates to various categories, but essentially the location of the phone itself, not necessarily what tower was being used for a transaction, or the distance the phone is from a cell tower at a given point in time.
And is that sometimes referred to as NELOS data?
For AT&T it is, yes.
Okay, these phones were on AT&T service, is that correct? Both Dan and Nancy Brophy's phones?
That's correct.
Now, there's been some testimony about whether some of the data was shared or some of the signaling was confused between the phones, between Dan and Nancy Brophy's phones. Were you able to determine whether they shared an account?
So there was information on both phones at times that appeared to be related to the other person. And what it appeared to be is that both phones were using the same Apple ID. So an Apple ID is going to be an account that you have with Apple. You can enter it into multiple devices, and when you do that, you can enable essentially a synchronization of certain data types across all devices using that Apple ID. So the data types that I saw that were commingled at times fell into the categories that would be commingled if two devices, for example, were using the same Apple ID and these synchronizations were enabled.
Okay, and you were able to determine that they in fact were sharing an Apple ID?
Yes.
Let's go to Exhibit 338, please, Mr. Breton. Now, did you have access to the CSLI data that AT&T maintained with respect to both the number associated with Nancy Brophy's phone and the number associated with Dan Brophy's phone?
Yes, and this is a old version of the document. There's an updated version that needs to actually be displayed here.
Did you get that in the incorporated? Don't want I don't know. Good question. Tell you to move through. And it, yes, so Mr. Roloff, is the only change in this, you said it was a new version, was it that you understood that one of the numbers had been incorrect, one of the phone numbers associated with this exhibit?
Yes, there had been a typo initially, and so there was a new version that was generated to correct that.
Okay, and the typo specifically had to do with the phone numbers, Dan Brophy's phone number or Nancy Brophy's phone number?
Yes, Nancy Brophy's phone number had been entered twice versus Dan's number.
Okay, so this actually has Dan's true number on it?
Correct.
Okay. Now, I was asking you about whether you had access to the AT&T data for both of those phones. Did you have the same quality of data? Did AT&T provide NELOS data, for example, with respect to both of those phones?
They did not. So NELOS data was not provided for Dan's phone.
So you had it for Nancy Brophy's phone, but not for Dan's. Were there other differences in the sort of the richness of the data that was provided from AT&T for the two phones? And I mean the service that went to the two phones?
No.
All right, so February 28th, can you give us just an overview of what the project was with respect to February 28th, what we were trying to determine?
We were trying to determine who was likely at the residence for a specific time on that date.
Okay. And did we tell you that on February 28th, there was a question about who had been present at the residence when a postal delivery was made?
Yes.
What did we tell you about the time of that postal delivery? What was the time that you were really targeting and trying to figure out?
It was in the afternoon. The next slide, I believe, shows at the time that's close to that. I believe it was around 2:26 or 2:28 p.m.
Okay. And this is February 18th of 2018, correct?
Correct.
Okay, what does this first slide show us?
This is a summary of activity related to Nancy's phone right around 2:56 p.m. And it's demonstrating a number of different data sets which demonstrate the phone using cell sites that are not consistent with her being at her residence.
Okay. And the point of the project was that the delivery was made to the Brophy home sometime a little bit after 2 o'clock in the afternoon on February 28th of 2018.
Yeah, yes, that was my understanding.
So what does this show us about, I can't read all of it from here, but what does this show us about where Nancy Brophy's phone was at roughly that time of the afternoon?
It would be southwest of Tigard.
Right. And is there a marker on that particular exhibit for the home itself to orient us?
There is, we're not seeing it here. In fact, the home is further north, and so it's out of view.
Okay, so we'll see that on another slide. Let's keep moving through that then. That looks like the home.
Yes. This is at the same time. There were transactions for Dan's phone at the same time that demonstrates the usage of a cell tower that was consistent with being at his residence.
Okay, so I take it that the way this exhibit was created, if it is data that's associated with the location of Dan Brophy's phone, it's showing up in green?
Yes,
And if it's associated with Nancy Brophy's phone, it's going to show up in purple?
correct.
So what's the time that we're seeing here where Dan Brophy's phone appears to be at their home?
Sure, we're seeing a couple of times here. We're seeing 2:36 and 2:54.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. And what's this showing us?
This starts the day. So this starts after 6 a.m. or just before 6 a.m. Activity for both devices leading up to what we just saw as a summary.
Okay, so the target, the time that we're focusing on is that time in between 2 and 3 p.m.,
Yes.
but you're going to start at the beginning of the day just to give a sense of what was happening overall.
Yes, try to understand the movements throughout the day. Yes.
Okay, now at least from here, I can't read the time, so could you kind of walk us through this as we go slide to slide, what we're seeing and what the time is?
Sure. So we're at 5:54 a.m. and we have a data point here for Dan's phone, and it's demonstrating the same tower we previously saw, which is a tower that has been consistent for times when it appears they are at home.
Okay. Mr. Breton, can you go on to the next one?
The next data point's at 11:54 here, demonstrating that Dan's phone appears to still be at the residence. And this one has been flipped like that previous exhibit here.
He's in China. Can you flip that back? Is there a key there that would tell you? Thank you. Okay, so now that you can read it, what time is this showing us? I take it that's still Dan Brophy's phone at their home.
Yes, 11:54.
All right, can we go to the next one? Thank you.
And this is still demonstrating the same tower being used for a transaction at 2:54.
Okay, so that again, is that the same slide that you showed us at the beginning? Because that's now in the target time range.
Correct, yes. Now it's just in kind of consecutive order.
Okay, so it appears from that, at least assuming that what you were seeing in between was consistent with this, that Dan Brophy was home basically all of those times that you've showed us from early in the morning through what's now almost 3 p.m.
At least his phone appears to be at home or in the close proximity based on this cell tower being used, yes.
Okay, fine. Okay, let's go to the next one. Thank you. Now, are we back early in the morning?
We are. So we're back in the morning, but this time for Nancy's phone. So this is around 8:55 a.m. A number of different towers are used. There's even a Nilos hit as well. For the most part, it's consistent with her being home or close to home.
And tell us again, I know you told us last week, but just so we're all kind of tracking, the Nilos data now that you have for Nancy Brophy's phone that wasn't available for Dan Brophy's phone, what more does that give you? What richness do we have with that we wouldn't have, with Dan's phone?
Yeah. It's an approximate location of the phone itself that AT&T produces with a confidence rating. So they'll say we're confident that we're within 100 meters of the phone in this estimate, or 1,000 or more. So it gives us an idea of where the phone is without the phone actually conducting a transaction. So all the other data sets we're looking at, the phone has to be doing something with a tower. It has to be routing data through that tower, sending a call, receiving a call, sending a text message, or receiving a text message. So this is independent of towers being used and specific to where AT&T thinks the phone might actually be.
So is AT&T essentially triangulating using a number of towers trying to get a specific location? Or, I mean, obviously there's not GPS on the phone, right? So how are they doing that with a higher confidence rating?
So they use a number of different technologies, and they don't disclose all of the technologies that they use. They do provide a warning with this information that it shouldn't be solely relied upon because there are potential errors. They don't keep it all the time, etc. So that answers your question.
Okay, as best you can.
Best I can.
Okay. All right, so orient us again to the time. Is this the one that's real early in the morning?
It's at 8:55 a.m.
Okay, all right. All right, so what happens in the next one?
So at 9:38 a.m., there is movement away from the residence that appears to be going into Portland.
Okay, and then what happens?
Then we have at 10:38 a.m., the phone is appearing to be in Portland.
All right. And then the next one?
This is between 11:13 and 11:29 a.m. The phone appears to still be in Portland and just north of 84.
Okay. A little bit of movement there.
At 12:13, there is some movement that starts heading a bit southwest, down towards kind of more the heart of Portland, or even over where OCI is. Between 12:54 and 1:11, there's additional movement that again keeps heading southwest and towards the Sherwood area.
And why is that so faint? Is that because there's actual travel going on?
You're seeing the faintness. So the colors that you're seeing there is really just it's a demonstration of a couple things. One being the azimuth of the sector that's being used for the transaction. There's a line for that shows you which side of the tower the phone's connecting with. And it's also to show you an approximate coverage area. Just for a visualization purpose, it is by no means the exact coverage area. And so the reason you're seeing some lighter shading here is there's a number of handoffs taking place, and those lighter shaded colorings are not going to be the first or the last handoff. It's going to be something in between.
Okay, so those handoffs do signify movement, like fairly rapid movement.
In this case, it appears to be signifying movement, yes.
Okay, all right. The next one, please. Thank you.
And this is 1:11 to 1:36. And again, the phone appears to be in that southwest direction, heading towards potentially Sheridan.
Towards Sheridan?
Yes.
Is that what you said? Okay, so had been around the Sherwood area and now is going out almost as far as Sheridan?
It's still a ways from there likely, but it's headed in that direction.
Okay.
And this one is 1:36 to 1:57. And then there's a bit of activity that's happening here. This is before it appears the phone would get to Sheridan. And this is 219 to 224. And again, a bit of activity again in the same area.
So when you say the same area, because I can't see it, what are the towns that are sort of central to that, the big circle we're looking at?
If you go down to the next one, we might get a better look at that. So this is again before Sheridan. This is 224 to 249. And we may need to go one more. And we're going to see a couple of other exhibits here, or items in this exhibit before we get back to the map that will give us a better idea of the towns. But there are two pictures that were located that were just shown to me, but we've gone past them here for a moment. So right here is going to be just to the east of McMinnville.
Okay, and was McMinnville in the middle? If we could go back up 3 slides. Is that oriented kind of the same way so that the brighter, lighter colored purple is over what the area of McMinnville that we were looking at in that easier to read map down below?
Yeah, so these data points would be consistent with towers in the McMinnville area being utilized.
Okay. Now, tell us about those two other slides in between. Why did you put those into this exhibit here?
So on one of the computers, is one, I believe the HP laptop computer, these two pictures were located with created dates that matched this time frame. And they appeared to be pictures taken. The first one is of an Oregon Health ID card. And then the next one is a similar type of, it's a United Healthcare card. And so these were created on February 28th, 2018 by an iPhone 6s Plus. And within this file, and actually both of these files, are GPS coordinates for where the phone was when the pictures were taken. And to kind of step back here for a moment, when we use our cameras, certain digital devices that are GPS enabled, when we take a picture or a video, at times you will have information stamped with inside those files, such as the GPS location the device was at the time the file was created. So using this information, I was able to plot what those locations are for both of these pictures being created, and we end up on I believe the next page.
Oh, the regular map we were looking at?
Yes.
Okay.
And that red marker is that exact location. And generally speaking, that would be consistent with the different cell towers that we saw being used during this time frame.
Okay, so we've got 2 different kinds of data coming off of different devices. The HP laptop apparently having been inherited from the iPhone. There's some kind of sync there of the photographs.
It appeared to be that the pictures have been transferred to that computer, yes.
Okay. And then we've got the AT&T data that tells us also that the phone, Ms. Brophy's phone, was in that same area right around McMinnville. Maybe not as far out as Sheridan, but having been traveling out in that direction southwest at the same time. Is that correct?
Yes.
And tell us again what the time frame is, for example, for those photographs that were taken.
It was just before 3 p.m., I believe.
Okay, so right in that target range that we were talking about for that delivery.
Between 2 and 3, yes.
Okay. All right, so when is it that she then gets back to their home? Or I shouldn't say she does, that her phone returns home.
If we could go down to the next screen. So at this point, we're at 3:27 to 3:38, and we start having some movement that appears to be consistent with going north. And at 4:02 to 4:05, we have additional information that again is consistent with the phone heading more in a north direction. Now we're at 4:54 to 4:55, and again the phone is a little bit further north, closer towards the Brophy home. And then from 5:17 to 5:21, additional movements or towers being utilized indicate further a likeliness that the phone is returning to the residence area. And then from 540 to 543, additional towers are utilized that would be consistent with being at the residence.
Okay, so all of those slides up to this point are consistent with travel toward the residence. And then finally, what was the time that the phone actually appears to be working off the towers that serve the residence?
It definitely was at right after 6, so 6:05 to 6:17. It's utilizing the same tower that we saw Dan's phone using earlier in the day. So 6 o'clock, I believe there might have been right at the end of 5 on the previous slide. There might have been that tower utilized at the very end there too.
So, but very, very close to 6 p.m. is what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. And anything else of interest in this exhibit?
Both phones appeared to reside there for the remainder of the night.
Okay, good. All right, thank you. So we've got one more of those, and it's a date that you'd mentioned when we were talking about that long synchronization process on the computer on March 26th. And that is, let's see if I've got the exhibit number. I think that is 364, Mr. Breton. You have that one? All right, now you said earlier that you were able to listen to Sequay's testimony in this case, in this trial,
Yes.
using the video.
Yes, and the transcripts.
Okay. And she testified twice. You listened to both?
I think 3 times, but one was a bleed over from a previous day, so maybe that counted as just twice.
Yeah, we count that as twice. So did you then, were you able to see the exhibits or review them separately that she used in conjunction with her testimony?
Yes.
Would you say that you agree generally with how she displayed what was going on with the CSLI on those days?
Yes.
Let's go through this exhibit, and I want you to expand on what she told us, understanding that you agree with most of what she said, but expand on what the data can tell us about exactly where Nancy Brophy was on those 2 days. And I say that understanding that there may be plenty of points where what you say in response is, it can't tell us exactly where she is. But I'd like you to try to do as much as you can to help us kind of fill in the blanks, or to tell us where there are blanks that just cannot be filled in.
Sure. So we're on page 1, which shows activity on March 26, 2018 at 11:15 a.m. And what we're seeing here on this map is we're seeing some blue pins. Those blue pins are cell towers that are not being used. So it just gives us an idea of the unused towers at this point in time. You will also see the purple tower, which is the tower that's being used for this transaction. And then I mentioned it previously, the azimuth, which is the center of the sector that's being used. You see that dark black line. In this case, it's pointing south. That is the center of the sector that's being utilized. So then we have the shading, which is just an approximation of what that tower in that sector could potentially cover. But this is demonstrating that that tower is being utilized on that side at this time for that transaction.
And is the section of the tower, the sector of the tower that's being used, will that always be the sector that is pointing toward the phone, the object?
No.
What would cause a different sector to be used? Why wouldn't it just use the one that's closest, that's pointing most directly at it?
There are many reasons why it may not use the sector or even the tower that is closest to it. But it can include things such as weather elements that are taking place, topography changes or challenges that exist, buildings and the types of materials that they're using that might be in between that phone and that side of the tower. So there's lots of reasons.
Okay, and then I take it from what you're saying that happens with some frequency?
It definitely happens.
Okay. And do you use the same software to do this analysis that Sequay told us about?
I have seen it used and used it before. I don't use that on a daily basis, no. But it's one of the types of software that we see used in CSLI cases to visualize the data to help make it a bit more understandable.
Okay, what's the software that you use generally, or but more specifically that you use to create this exhibit?
Well, so I manually review the data for one, and then I use a tool that's called Tracks by a company with the name ZedX, and I use that tool to help visualize these materials. I also use Google Earth, Google Maps.
Okay.
Let me stop you there. We're just at about 3:15. Why don't we go ahead and take our afternoon break and come back at 3:30? right, please be seated. And Mr. Roloff, if you want to take the stand again. Whenever defense is ready.
You have some water?
I do.
Good,
Thank you.
Okay, so we're still on March 26th here, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and you were explaining, I think, something about how the software creates that purple circle that we're looking at. I think we were about to start going into that so that we understand, the rest of us understand, whether that's an exact indication of how far that tower would reach, or, I mean, what is it that we're looking at there with that circle?
It's just a demonstrative aid essentially to demonstrate, first off, just which sector is being used on that cell site and the direction that that sector points, and then to provide a visual example of the radio frequencies that could exist and the different directions they could go in. So this is, again, by no means exactly what would occur in every scenario. In fact, if you see the three towers that are almost all being touched further south, if the phone was closer to those towers, significantly closer to those towers, in a lot of scenarios, I'd expect those three towers to be getting used versus the tower that is being used here that's further north.
Okay, but and I think you were explaining this just a moment ago, if, for example, you're in a pretty mountainous area, pretty hilly area, even if the phone were closer to those other towers, potentially that topography could interfere and the phone would actually link up, connect to a tower that was further away?
That can definitely happen, yes.
Okay. And is this in fact in a fairly hilly area?
It is.
You said you were able to look at Google Earth and kind of compile various sets of data to come up with these exhibits?
Google Earth was one of the tools I used, yeah.
Okay. So the tower that's in use is the one that is pretty close to the center, the one that's in purple, correct?
That's correct.
And what do we know at that point about what direction the vehicle's moving, the phone is moving?
Well, there were earlier data points showing the towers actually below being utilized to an extent. Essentially, there was information demonstrating that the phone had been moving in essentially a north direction.
Northerly.
Correct.
Okay. And the main road there that's going through, is that Highway 26? I can just barely see the shape of
It is Highway 26, and from just looking at the towers that were used prior to this slide, it appeared those towers that were being utilized would be consistent with a car on 26 going in a northwest kind of direction.
Okay, so what you saw up to this point was consistent with somebody in the Portland area taking Highway 26 as if they were going to go out to the coast in that direction, going west?
This direction period, yeah, the coast could be one of the
Well,
destinations.
I don't mean getting to the coast. What I'm asking about is the direction would be westerly out of town on 26.
Correct.
Okay, so let's go to the next slide then. What does that show us?
This shows us the background information about that connection to the tower. So this is the metadata about the connection essentially. So it shows us that it's a data transaction. It shows us that the duration was 4 minutes and 1 second. It also points out the azimuth that we just saw on the black line and some other information about the tower and the transaction.
Now, when you say it's a data transmission, are you distinguishing between what the phone is doing with the towers kind of on its own and something that's more user-generated?
So data transmissions just simply mean the cellular networks being utilized to transmit data, not a text, not a phone call. And a data transmission can be initiated because of an action that the user is conducting on their phone. But there are many instances, if not maybe more instances, where the phone's doing something on its own and those data transmissions are occurring.
And is there a general term for when the user does something to cause interaction with the tower, sends a text, receives a text, makes a call, does something like that? What is that called as opposed to a data transmission?
So you would see a different transaction type here. You wouldn't see data. You would see a call or a voice is what you would see, or you'd see SMS.
It just specify exactly what the activity is. In other
Yes.
words. Okay. All right. Now, we go through, get to the next slide, and you're welcome to to walk us through this, but I'd like to understand what movement we see in this slide.
So this movement, the transaction transfers from that essentially northwest tower to a southeast tower, heading back along potentially Highway 26 towards Portland.
Okay, and in that, again, what town is right above sort of the top, the most northerly point of the purple circle?
Vernonia.
And what are the other towns that are encompassed within the circle?
Buxton.
Where is Banks from there? Can you see that on the map?
I cannot.
And does it show Timber? I'm sorry, I really can't read this that well myself. Does it show where the town of Timber is?
No.
But Vernonia is right there, up right off the edge of the bubble to the top.
Yes.
And then you've got a pin there for the Wolf Creek Public Range.
Correct.
All right, so that on the 26th, it appears that the phone is close to Vernonia and close to the Wolf Creek Public Range, but that, at least if the software is correct, that coverage area wouldn't include actually being within the city of Vernonia or at the public range.
Well, again, I wouldn't say that the software was correct or incorrect. This is just an example of what the radio frequencies could look like from this tower based on this sector orientation. So it really has nothing to do with what the software is interpreting here. And without a drive test, we can't be certain of exactly what would transpire depending on the roads being used, the weather that day, how the towers were oriented and configured on that day. All we can say is that the phone used a sector off that more northwest tower that was facing south, and then it transitioned to using a further southeast tower that has a sector now facing northwest.
Okay. Now, you just mentioned a drive test. Did we talk about you actually conducting a drive test?
We did.
And can you tell the jury what that is and why you would do that?
Yeah, so we can do a drive test to determine what the radio frequency strengths are and what towers are being connected to, like the strongest signal to each different tower as we drive various roads or walk various paths. And so that can be done. It's done in various types of cases to determine if a phone is in a certain specific position, which tower is likely to handle the transactions at that point. But as time goes on and we get further and further away from a specific instance that we're looking at, it becomes a bit less reliable because the towers don't always have the same configuration. There's different elements related to weather that can change. If you were in a city or a town, there's different buildings that could exist now, different materials in the buildings. So based on just the duration of time that we were at when we discussed the drive test, we decided not to do that.
Okay. And if the device changes, does that make it harder to conduct a reliable drive test?
So the device that's being used is important to take into account. So our phones actually are responsible for the first tower that we connect to, not the cellular network. So the phone is going to connect to the tower that it believes is going to give it the greatest success. And then at that point, the network takes over and starts the transactions of the handoffs as they are required. So a phone, the type of phone, the level of its battery at a moment can all change, and the determination of that phone of which tower to first use.
Okay. And if enough time has passed and new towers have been built, how does that impact your ability to do a reliable drive test?
Again, just like the previous items, it would affect the reliability because something new had been introduced to this environment that didn't exist previously.
All right. Did you ultimately determine that it really didn't make sense to try to do a drive test in this instance?
Yes.
And is that because the passage of time and all of these other elements that you just discussed?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I think you said at this point that the phone appears to be traveling in a southeasterly direction again. Is that correct?
Well, it'd be consistent. This transition of the towers being used would be consistent. I mean, the phone could be stationary at this point too, just uses this other tower. There's a number of potential. However, if you continue to look at the next transactions that take place, it is consistent with the phone continuing to move in that southeast direction back towards Portland.
Okay. What about the next slide?
So this is just showing the metadata for that transaction. So again, it's a data connection, and it's showing that the duration of the data connection was 42 minutes and 25 seconds. That does not mean that this phone was utilizing that tower for the data connection for this entire duration. This is just the total duration before that data session ended.
Okay. What about the next one?
So now we're on to March 27th. So we stopped the 26th up to the previous slide. And what we're seeing is that first tower that we saw on the 26th being utilized again on the 27th at 10:38 a.m. And again, that same sector that is facing south, maybe a little bit southeast, is being utilized for this transaction.
Okay, so this time we can see Gales Creek and Banks and Buxton. And then Vernonia, I take it, is further to the north.
It is.
Okay. All right, what about the next slide?
This is the metadata for that transaction. So it's showing that it was it's a data connection, 29 minutes and 24 seconds in duration.
Right. And the next one?
So we see that same tower being utilized, but now we're using a different sector. We've switched to a sector that is facing northwest, and that sector is being utilized for this transaction.
Okay, and what's the approximate time here?
10:39 a.m.
And then in the next, let's see, well, let's go back to that one just for a minute. What are the towns toward the right-hand side, what are the towns that are sort of obscured by that color, but, visible sort of, or adjacent to that?
I see Clear Creek, Bacona, Vernonia, Pittsburgh, Kesey.
Okay, now, in the next slide, and you don't need to go through the tracks reports unless there's something there that you really want to pull out as significant.
Nope, there's not. We can move on.
What's this one now showing us?
So we're back to the original sector on the same tower being utilized. So again, we're back to the sector that's facing southeast, essentially, south to a little bit southeast. This transaction is happening at 11:04 a.m.
Okay, and let's go to the next and stay on the tracks this time. Now, what is on the tracks, the next one? Thanks. What does this tell us?
So this was an incoming voice call. And we can see that the incoming voice call came to this phone and that the total duration for that transaction was 42 seconds.
Okay, and so does that tell you that when that call is placed, that the time and the location are more accurate than they are in the preceding slide?
It's not more accurate. I mean, maybe you can rephrase that question.
So what's the significance of the fact that what shows up this time is a phone call?
So it's not a data transaction. This is also the first tower that be utilized for this transaction. So there haven't been handoffs that have taken place at this point. This would be the initiating tower for the transaction.
Okay, and is it possible that the phone had been close to that tower prior to this phone call, or does this tell us that that those two things happened simultaneously, that the phone connected to that tower for the first time with this call?
The phone connected to this tower because the phone chose this tower as the best tower for the service at this time.
Okay, and again, what time is this?
11:04 a.m., almost 11:05.
And the next slide, please, Mr. Breton. Now what are we seeing?
We're seeing the same tower we saw on the 26th, again, that is further southeast, being utilized for this transaction, and the sector orientation is facing in the northwest direction.
And the purple tower is the one now that's being used?
Yes.
And that's true in all of these slides?
In all of these slides, the purple tower is the one that's in use for the transactions. The blue towers are not being used, but they exist.
Okay. And do we have one more slide in this? I mean, after this.
This is demonstrating the remaining paths that essentially that were taken, or the remaining towers that were utilized during this data transaction, which demonstrates a path that appears to go back toward the Brophy home.
Mr. Breton, could you go through the rest of that just slowly but consistently? No, keep going forward if there are any more. Oh, okay, good, thank you. All right, Mr. Roloff, I appreciate that. I realized that was very detailed. It took some time, but I appreciate you being so patient. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Got no further questions.
All right, cross-examination.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Hi, Mr. Roloff. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I just want to cover a few areas. I know you said that for the most part, watching Ms. Gway's testimony, that you kind of, for the most part, agreed with kind of the locations and things like that. So I just want to go over a few things.
Sure.
I want to go to the beginning of what Ms. Weinmiller was talking about. And she mentioned something about identifying the account. I think you said in Apple ID, it was the same Apple ID used on both devices.
Correct.
Okay. And that you identified some things in there that sort of led you to believe that these phones were definitely connected.
That they were connected to the same Apple ID and they were sharing certain pieces of information at times, yes.
Okay, what kind of piece of information were you seeing that were being shared that sort of led you to believe that?
Voicemails,
Okay.
call logs, some SMS messages or iMessages.
Okay. What about photographs?
I don't believe I tied that to this specifically, but I do believe there was an overlap of photographs, yes.
Okay, so if they're, just by way of an example, some of the testimony you already heard, is that some photos that were maybe seen on Dan's phone that really looked like they more or less belonged to Ms. Brophy because they were related to like insurance sales.
Correct.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Anything else, any other documents or anything?
There may have been, but not anything that's coming to mind right now.
Okay. And you said that the messages were, the text messages between Dan and Nancy were taken from Dan's phone. Is that correct?
Yes.
A download of Dan's phone.
They were taken from a mobile forensic extraction of Dan's phone, yes.
Okay. That's a more technical way of saying it, I suppose. But these are messages that you were led to believe actually came off of Dan's phone.
Correct. Based on the documentation I had for the forensic extraction, it was my understanding that was Dan's phone. In addition, just content that existed on it appeared to be related to Dan.
Okay. And so you didn't have any problems believing that those came off of Dan's phone and not off of Nancy's phone?
I don't know.
Okay. And is there a reason, or did you get any text messages from Nancy's phone?
I don't recall getting any text messages from her phone between the two of them.
Were you provided with a phone download of her phone as well?
I was.
And you didn't see any text messages between the two?
I don't recall there being any text messages between the two, but I believe the phone download that exists was for a phone that was in use after the events here.
I see. Oh, as if she got a new phone.
Correct.
Okay. And so was there any data between or prior to June 2nd, 2018 on Nancy's phone?
It was minimal.
What was it? What was it?
I believe it was like multimedia files.
Okay.
So pictures, videos, things like that.
Okay. So prior to June 2nd, 2018, on Nancy's phone at least, you don't see any messages, call logs, website visits, anything like that?
Correct.
Now you said that there was an eBay confirmation email about, I think these are like goblets or something? I don't know if I'm saying that right. Some sort of glassware or something?
Emails related to a successful purchase that looked like on eBay, yes.
Okay. Did you find an email that was related to the purchase of the slide and barrel as well?
Yes.
From eBay?
Yes.
Were there any other emails from eBay?
I believe there were.
Do you recall what those were?
No.
Okay. Was there an email from eBay regarding the cancellation of the account?
I believe there was, yes.
Okay. And you can't recall besides that what other emails from eBay there were?
I can't recall how many there were. There definitely were emails from eBay, but unless I was asked to specifically look at it,
That's
it
okay.
definitely was a fleeting thought.
Okay. So you just didn't look into that further?
Correct.
Okay. Now, I just wanted, the one video that you said was no longer available, you're not saying that it wasn't a video that existed back in 2018. You're saying now when you're trying to access it, it's not there anymore.
Correct.
Okay. And when is the first time you tried to access that?
It would have been this year.
Okay.
So in 2022.
Okay, so about 3.5 years from the time, or I guess actually almost 4 years from
Yes.
the time that it was initially accessed.
Yes.
Okay, but you don't know when there, in that 4 years that video was taken down?
I don't.
Okay. You talked about very clearly about how when somebody accesses, say, like a YouTube video, and then you see another video start after that, that sort of gives you an indicator about how long somebody would have watched that first video, or whether they watched it at all.
It sure can.
Right. And so one of the things you mentioned was, and I'm not going to use specifics, I'll speak more generally, but one of the things you mentioned was that a video is accessed and then something else is accessed, say, 30 seconds later. Can you really tell that that first video is still not playing in like another browser and they just opened a new browser? Can you tell that? Whether something
No.
happened?
No, I mean, there are instances where you could tell that. Yeah. In this case, I could not tell if they were still open in another browser. It would be challenging to have two videos playing at the same time and make
competing.
out what is going on, but no, that situation could occur, yes.
Okay. And you just can't tell. So,
correct.
So by way of an example, Ms. Brophy brings up the video regarding the cleaning and disassembly of a firearm, and then 49 seconds later starts watching another video. We don't know that that first video is not still playing.
Correct.
It could be playing on the side and she just got another browser up and researching something else.
Could, yes.
Okay. And then additionally on that, again with that time frame, let's say, I know one of these you said there was about 2 minutes. Can you tell that 2 minutes, let's assume she's only watching 2 minutes. Can you tell what part of the video she's watching those 2 minutes? Meaning, is she watching it from the beginning? Do you have any way to tell that?
No, there's no indication of that.
Okay, so if I'm watching a 20-minute video, this is just hypothetical, 20-minute video, you can tell that I only have that before I go on to the next thing for about 2 minutes. You don't know if I'm clicking through the video looking for a certain part that I actually want to watch.
Correct.
Okay. One thing I was a little confused about, you talked about I don't remember the term used, so feel free to correct me, but it was specifically when you're talking about the search regarding how to load a Glock 9mm. And then you said, but you're seeing all of these other searches, essentially telling you you're not searching all of those things or watching all of those videos at the same time. What was the term that you used?
A synchronization.
Synchronization, thank you. And you're saying that synchronization can happen when somebody buys a new or sets up a new laptop, and is essentially, is it synchronizing with their profile that they've previously created?
Yes. Okay. So you'll see it frequently if you get a new device, or even if you change web browsers, for example, or go back to a web browser that you've logged out of, and you log in with your associated account. So like for Chrome, for example, if you have a Google account, Chrome will associate your browsing activity with that Google account. If you log into a new device with that profile, you're going to have a lot of content from your other devices get synchronized to that device. So that's an example of when this could happen.
I think that makes sense. Just by way of an example, I guess, would be if Miss Brophy, say, logged out of her Chrome account. Say she has a Gmail account, she logs out of Chrome, and then she starts using like another web browser, like Internet Explorer or something. And then she decides she wants to go back to Chrome, and then she re-logs in. You're saying that's when you can get that synchronization?
That is one of, many scenarios that could occur from, yes.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear that when you say that those things aren't being all viewed at the same time, you're not saying those weren't ever viewed. You're saying they weren't viewed at that moment.
Correct.
Okay. And so would you agree that those things were accessed and potentially viewed at some point, just not at that moment?
Yes, and I think we even went through a few of them on earlier dates, yes.
Right, okay. I think I want to pull up, could we put up 364?
I got it right here.
Oh, you're going to do it?
I can.
Okay.
Does it matter which one I do? Yeah, just covered, I think.
Yeah.
Or something.
Because that's external. See if this actually.
Is it not working? No, there isn't that on this side. Do I have to go to the
Oh,
other
it
side?
has to be over there.
No, it's okay. That is weird. Do your screen. That's weird. 1 second.
Yep, we can start there. Okay, and I'm going to use a pointer so that I can direct you to what I'm asking you questions about.
Okay.
And so.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe I'll stand over here. So I'm not speaking to you. Is it okay from over here? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So you already testified about which tower is being used, being the purple one, correct?
Yes,
And you're saying this big circle, that's really just a demonstrative.
100%.
Okay, you're not saying that if the phone is somewhere in here, that it's going to be bouncing off that tower.
Correct.
Okay. In fact, would you agree that if the phone is somewhere, say in this area, you would expect it to hit off these towers?
I would, and part of the reason I'd come to that conclusion is just historically looking at these specific records, we see when there appears to be travel, that exact situation happening where the phones are using those towers.
Okay.
So, yes.
And I believe you testified to that as it appeared that the vehicle traveling along 26, it's hitting these other towers along the way.
Correct.
Okay. And then I want to take it a step further, kind of expanding this a little bit. If you had the phone, say, down in this area, or even off the screen here, farther away, you really are not going to be expecting it to hit off that tower, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So for all intents and purposes, on the 26th and on the 27th, you're saying it does appear that the phone is traveling along, or what's consistent with traveling along Highway 26?
Yes.
Heading west, at some point turning around and coming back into town.
Yes.
Okay. Can we scroll down to the next? Yeah, that's fine. Sorry. And actually, can we keep going? Go to the 27th. There we go. So this looks exactly like the one on the 26th, because again, you're just using the demonstrative, but at 10:38, the phone is somewhere in this general region. But you testified too that this sector doesn't necessarily mean that the phone is on this side of the tower.
That's correct.
You would expect it to be, is that fair?
I wouldn't expect it to be. Okay. It just would be a normal situation that the phone would be on this side of the sector, but it's also not abnormal for the phone to be to the left or the right or even slightly behind that sector.
And that's what I want to ask you about next is, you have, I know this is a demonstrative, so I'm not trying to hold you to anything, but you have this kind of going up, kind of back, I guess, back behind that tower. So this is still kind of covering Highway 26. So if the phone or the vehicle and the phone were here, you're saying it's still possible it could be not only hitting off this tower, but it could be hitting off this sector.
Yes.
Okay. Jeez. And that's at 10:38. Can we go to the next one, please? And I don't want to belabor this too much, but obviously the phone could be kind of behind the tower here too, but hitting off this sector. But given the times that you have and that sort of moving from one sector to the other sector, would that be consistent with the phone, again, traveling on Highway 26 and maybe even passing the tower around that time?
Yes.
Okay, can we go to the next one? And then we don't see that phone again on that lower southern sector until 11:04, correct?
Or anywhere else, correct?
Or anywhere else. Okay, thank you. Yeah, no, thanks. And that time at 11:04, you said that was a phone call, correct?
Correct.
Is that an incoming call or an outgoing call?
Incoming.
And that was the one that was hitting on that southern sector at 11:04.
Correct.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, Mr. Roloff, I think that's all the questions I have for you. Thank you.
Okay, redirect.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just a couple. Mr. Roloff, you were asked about the text threads and taking them off of Dan Brophy's phone rather than Nancy Brophy's phone, and you explained that there was a much shorter period of time data available on Nancy Brophy's phone, and that in fact didn't cover the period before June 2nd.
Correct.
Do you recall when that data on Nancy Brophy's phone shows up?
I don't recall the exact date.
Do you recall that it was later that summer of 2018?
That sounds correct.
Was what you saw on her phone consistent with somebody getting a new iPhone in, say, August of 2018?
Yes.
And if somebody didn't back up their phone and know how to restore data to it and migrate data over from an old phone, would it potentially look like the phone that you examined of Nancy Brophy's?
Yes.
Now, you were also asked some questions about whether she might have skipped ahead on one of those videos, that she might have watched 2 minutes, but she knew exactly which 2 minutes she wanted to watch and skipped ahead to a section in the video that she was interested in. I think, though, that you had testified that you didn't see evidence that she had looked at those videos on other occasions.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so there wasn't evidence that she was so familiar with videos that she would have known where to skip ahead to see a particular section of interest to her.
I saw just the single access to each of those.
Okay. And then with respect to the exhibit that you were looking at the end there, 364, and the purple circles and the movement, I understand that you've said that if somebody gets close enough to another tower, there's going to be a handoff and you'll see a transfer. The purple tower over here will go blue and the new tower will show up as purple. But is it also true that within those circles and in that demonstrative, that there really are a number of points, there are a number of locations that the phone could be, that those demonstratives that you put up there and what we know about the movement of the phone that day does not indicate that the phone stayed on 26 the entire time?
Correct. It's consistent with a number of different paths, yes.
Okay, and the best we can do, the best you can do, and the best the software can do is say it's probably within the colored area, and it's probably not too close to one of the other blue towers, because there would be a handoff to another blue tower. But there are factors that could influence that, including topography and weather and apparently battery strength, if I understood what you said correctly before. But that is an approximation of the general area that the phone was in at that point in time. And we just can't be exact and specific.
Yeah, I would agree. It's a general approximation. There's a lot of factors to take into account, such as all the other towers that exist around it that are not being used, as well as roads, patterns of behavior, things like that. But yes, it's a general approximation of a coverage area.
And as you were constructing that exhibit and looking at that period of time, did you see any evidence, even in the CSLI, that there was some confusion between the two Brophy phones?
Evidence within the CSLI data sets?
Yes, or anything else?
I'm not thinking of anything offhand with the AT&T data, but if you want to point me to something, maybe that'll refresh my memory.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
All right. May Mr. Roloff be excused, or will he be testifying again?
No, I think that's it. Thank you.
For the state?
Yes.
Okay, all right, you can step down.
Defense would call Wendy Warren.
Okay. All right, Ms. Warren, we'll have you come on up to the witness box here and go ahead and step into it, but don't have a seat just yet. We'll have you get as close to the microphone as you can, and my clerk will give you an oath.
Okay. I'll ask you to please raise your right hand. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Okay, then you may be seated. Thank you. Your mask. And then because we're being recorded, I'll ask you to scooch up just a little bit. And then if you could please state and spell your first and last name.
Yes, my name is Wendy Warren, Wendywarren.
All right, when defense is ready.
Good afternoon, Ms. Warren.
Actually, I apologize. I forgot to tell Ms. Warren there is water there if you'd like some.
Thank you.
Sure.
You gonna pass on the water?
Pass on the water.
You know the woman sitting next to me?
I do.
And when did you meet her?
I first met Nancy, oh my gosh, I want to say it's between probably 18 and 20 years ago at a writers' conference it was somewhere near Portland, and Nancy was catering. And I didn't know her at that time, didn't know her as a writer, but my family was in the restaurant business. My mom was a caterer, and I was so impressed by the food. And when I say that, I don't mean necessarily even what we were eating, although it was delicious. I remember that, but it was the generosity of spirit. There was, you can cater and kind of in a flashy way, but this was more in a way, there's a way to make food that says, I love you, I'm telling you I care about you, and that's what impressed me. So I thought, well, I want to meet whoever catered this. So I introduced myself to Nancy and just asked her about her catering. And then, I don't remember how much later, maybe it was a year or 2 years later, I was doing a book signing with Susan Lute, and at a bookstore that was owned by a friend of ours, Kim Wallenberg, and Nancy catered a tea for the signing. And again, it was just, there was such a largesse of spirit, such a generosity. And I had my then 2-year-old with me, and she was running around, and I thought, oh my gosh, there's this gorgeous tea being done, and I've got this little 2-year-old running around. And Nancy was just so loving and kind and sweet to her. And so, yeah, that just made me want to get to know her more.
And so what has been your interaction with her after those catering events?
I would see Nancy mostly at writers' meetings when Rose City Romance Writers would have a meeting. But then I moved to Ashland for a while, and when I moved back, I was part of a small writers group. When I moved back, the writers group had expanded, and Nancy was in it. So then we would meet at people's homes and just get together, write, or for holiday exchanges, things like that.
Have you been in the Brophy's home
Yes, I have been.
and frequently or?
I think once or twice for the writers' meetings, and then once when we were helping Nancy clean up and clean the basement and the rest of the house, yeah.
Did you ever get to meet Dan Brophy?
I did. I met Dan at a cookie exchange, a holiday cookie exchange that was at the Oregon Culinary Institute, and Dan and Nancy were hosting it. And at that time had a second child, a young one, who was having a very hard day. And Dan and Nancy were just lovely, 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 warm, caring. And Nancy was hanging out with her granddaughter, and just, yeah, they were wonderful. They just made the day lovely for us.
I want you just to talk generally about writing and maybe describe for the jury your kind of from your perch being immersed in one's writing or in one's writing world.
Yeah.
What do you experience?
Well, writing, the way I experience writing is that I kind of live two lives. I live the life around me, but I'm also in my head a lot, playing out this movie in my head. So my family would tell you that at any given time they will talk to me and I will answer them, but I don't remember what I've said. You know, part of me is in the book.
And when you're immersed in your writing, how long can that period go for you? Are we talking minutes, hours?
Always, kind of always. It's because you never, as a writer, I don't know that you ever stop. Just because a book contract ends, you're already in the next one. Yeah, 3 days max, I might stop and take a break from my mind, from what's going on in my mind.
Sounds like you've met Dan maybe just a handful of times.
Yeah,
Is that right?
yeah, had not met Dan a lot. Felt like I met him because Nancy would always bring his food to our groups. Felt like it felt like his presence was there more.
And did she talk a lot about him?
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, they had what seemed to me to be a really loving and lovely partnership. She would always talk about him with a lot of, I would say, gratitude and affection. I would say were the chief ways she would discuss Dan, and then also some sexy talk. There was quite a bit of that. Yeah. I got a lot of tips.
That's embarrassing for everyone. We'll move
Yeah, well, but Nancy was, of our friendship group, was already in her 60s, and so the rest of us weren't yet. Most of us were not, and got a lot of hope. One time we were together, and the talk turned to postmenopausal sex, is what it turned to, and
I'm not sure what the question was, but I think we've gone beyond.
Yeah, why don't we,
We can
yeah,
stop,
let's
yeah.
just, it's okay. So,
sorry,
let's
that's
just
the
have
writer in me.
Okay. Do you remember when Dan died? I'm not asking for a date. I'm just remembered. Do you remember hearing
Yeah.
that Dan had
Yeah.
died? And sometime shortly after that, did you go to Ms. Brophy's home?
I did.
Who was there?
Nancy, Jessie Smith, Linda Smith, Susan Lute, I believe one of Nancy's nieces, possibly Darla Lukenbaugh, but I can't remember if she was there that day.
And why did you go there?
We went there to help Nancy clean the house. We had talked about it months earlier, about like cleaning each other's basements and things. And so somebody, I can't remember who, but somebody suggested that we just go over and clean up.
Before we talk about your impressions of Nancy that day, can you just describe for the jury this basement that you were cleaning out?
Yeah, large space, and there was a wall, or maybe like a wall and a half of canned things that Dan had canned a lot, and then another probably wall or two of mostly what I remember were cooking utensils, a lot of pots and different things, and then some just, things that you would have in the basement, little tchotchkes and things.
Were there multiples of everything?
Yes, there was a lot down there.
In the beginning of the day, as you guys were cleaning out, what was your impression of Nancy?
She was actually being a good hostess. She was, going upstairs to the people who were upstairs, helping out there. Then she'd come downstairs. She'd get a little misty every now and again, like over the canned stuff. If she was saying, well, Dan canned these at this time, and here's how we felt about it, that kind of thing. But in the beginning, I would say she had a company face, like she was, yeah.
Was there a time that all of you were headed off to lunch?
Mm-hmm.
And did Nancy's demeanor change at this point?
Yeah, it did. She and I were upstairs in the kitchen, cleaning the kitchen and going through, and again, it was a lot of his things. And somebody came in and said, let's take a break. Let's go to lunch. And we got up to leave, and she went past the sink, which was broken. I can't remember if it was a garbage disposal or something was broken. And she pointed to the sink and said, the last thing I said to him was, Dan, you've got to fix that sink. And then she looked at me and she started to cry, and she said, don't let that be the last thing you say to someone you love.
After you left the kitchen, did you drive somewhere?
We did. We drove to a Thai restaurant.
Okay. And where were you sitting in the car?
I think I was in the front passenger seat, and Nancy was in the rear driver's side.
Did you check on her then?
Yes. Her demeanor was down at that point when she got in the car. And one of us asked her, how you doing? And that was when she, hostess face, company face was gone. And she got very sad and seemed lost, kind of, and admitted that she wasn't doing well and that she was really struggling with grief and some depression. And then she said she thought she might need to get some help.
After Nancy's arrest, did you visit her at jail?
I did.
And were you by yourself or with other writers?
Other writers.
And did the group have a rule about what subjects you could talk about and what subjects you couldn't talk about?
Yep, they said don't bring up Dan. Yeah.
Did you?
I did.
Why?
Because it seemed wrong to me that she was grieving alone, without people she knew. And the chit chat seemed artificial at times to me.
When you brought up Dan, how did Nancy respond?
She started crying right away, and her eyes got very red, and she talked about how much she missed him and that he was with her every day, and she talked to him all the time. And how much she missed his food.
Had you seen Nancy Brophy cry before this time?
Only once. Nancy was always, struck me as very strong. But when her mother died, after her mother died, I had been, I think, not living in, well, I hadn't been at the writers groups for a while, and I saw Nancy, and I said, I'm really sorry, and she teared up, started crying, and talked about how hard that was.
Those are the only two times that you've seen her cry?
Yeah, that's the only two.
I have no other questions. Thank you.
Cross-examination.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Ms. Warren. The day that you're talking about cleaning out the basement and the going to lunch, that was the day Mr. Brophy died?
No, it was quite a bit after that. Well, not quite a bit. It was summer. I remember that.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it wasn't the day he died.
No.
It was when you went over there.
Right,
And
yeah.
so when all those people were there, that's when you went to clean the basement
Right.
and went
Yeah.
to lunch.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the statement that Nancy made to you, do you recall being interviewed on February 8th of this year by a defense investigator?
I don't remember the date, but I was interviewed. Yeah.
Okay. And do you recall telling her that Nancy's statement to you was, Dan, you have to fix the leak under the sink?
Not the leak under the sink. I don't remember what part of the sink. She just said you have to fix that sink.
You don't remember telling Meredith Guardino that her words were, Dan, you have to fix the leak under the sink?
I don't remember saying the leak. Yeah.
Okay. Let me. I guess I'll get rid of this one. I'm going to show you investigative report, and if you can just read it to yourself without reading it out loud.
Mm-hmm.
And do you see that there's a portion there that's in quotations?
Yeah, there are a couple of portions in quotes.
And does that refresh your recollection that that's what you told Ms. Guardino?
No, I don't remember saying fix the leak because I honestly don't remember what was wrong with the sink. My impression was that it was the garbage disposal.
All right. And as you're having that conversation with Ms. Brophy, did she tell you where she was the morning that he died?
No,
You didn't ask her any questions. She didn't tell you anything further.
no.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor. Thank
All
you.
right. May this witness be excused?
Thank you.
Yes.
All right.
Your Honor, I think we've run out.
Wait,
of-
I apologize. Is this?
Yes.
Okay, so the state excused too, yes. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Ms. Maxwell.
I think that's our last witness for the day.
Okay. All right, so we will be in recess then with the jury to come back on Monday at the normal time. And I do have something I want to bring up with the attorneys after the jury steps out. Everyone can be seated. I just wanted to ask both sides. So I have had a chance to, I will say, skim, not read carefully, the defense motions. So I have a general idea of what the arguments will be about. Along those lines, and I'm not going to hold you to this entirely, but can defense give me an idea of how many witnesses you're anticipating and who those people might be?
Your Honor, one of the questions that we have for the court, given the nature of the hearing, is whether WebEx testimony would be allowed. We've obviously been putting this together in very, very short clock, and there are witnesses who did not have an opportunity to travel to Oregon who would be available to testify by WebEx. I certainly understand that for purposes of trial proceedings before the jury, that would be different, but for the hearing, we were hoping that that might be possible.
Does the state have any objection to that?
We don't know who they are, so.
Who are the witnesses that we would be?
This particular, the one that I'm thinking of right now is a woman who lives in California whose brother is a business partner, or was at one point a business partner of Ms. Jacobs, She herself invited Ms. Jacobs into her home, allowed her to live with her. That was some period of time ago, but her brother's involvement and the family's observations have continued into much more recent years. There is a dentist in Hood River who I think can be here by 2:30, but has appointments in the morning. But he would like to testify as well.
And so let me pause you for 1 minute. I should have asked this up front, but I didn't. Has the state even had a chance to read the defense motions yet?
I think I have not.
Okay.
I think it's been skimmed.
Yes.
All right, so I'm assuming, Ms. Weinmiller, that these witnesses we've discussed so far go to the motion regarding the scope of cross-examination if I allow the state's witness to testify, because the second motion is asking for an expansion of what would normally be allowed for cross-examination. So those are two people, and I cut you off. I didn't know if there were more.
With respect to the first motion, and many of these witnesses, I think, do span both motions.
Okay, sure.
But with respect to the discovery portion and whether the court should simply exclude the witness, you know, there are many lawyers involved in this process, and some of them have privilege concerns and would need, I think, a directive from the court to be able to testify about the representation. At least one of the lawyers is in a position where she at one point represented Ms. Jacobs, but then also was impersonated by Ms. Jacobs. So she's both lawyer and victim. And I don't know, I mean, this has all been developing so quickly, Your Honor, that it's not like we have a list yet of all of these people. We have been petitioning to try to get permission, but from a number of agencies, law enforcement, prosecutorial agencies, to get the requisite permission to have former prosecutors, for instance, who've been involved in cases with Ms. Jacobs, to be able to come in and provide their assessment in some detail about the crimes for which she's been convicted. We're also trying to get information out of the Department of Justice, the Oregon Department of Justice. I alerted the court when we first brought this up. I think it was a week ago Tuesday, on May 3rd, when we first talked about this. The court had directed the state, as I understood the court's ruling on the motion that was then pending before the court, directed the state to obtain information from the Oregon Department of Justice about this investigation of Ms. Jacobs, ongoing investigation, criminal investigation, something that has not yet been indicted, and to bring that information to the court and to us. We've heard absolutely nothing from the state about that since that time. So we ourselves have now subpoenaed the lawyer who's handling that matter at the department. I'm sure are going to result in motions to quash being brought before the court, and we'll have to work through a process for ascertaining who would be testifying and what of that material isn't privileged and would need to be provided. But I can tell you that there are indications that she's been investigated, is being investigated. There is an open investigation. There's been a proposal, actually, that there be some pre-indictment negotiation in that Department of Justice criminal investigation. We've gotten indications that she, at one point, was working. There's something in her records, I think, that came from the jail that she represents, that she at some point worked for the Oregon Medical Board. There's the dentist in Hood River who's one of the victims of the federal cases. There's another urologist, I believe, in LeGrand, who's also, I can't say he's a named victim because he appears by initials in the federal indictment, but we believe we've been able to determine that he is the victim of the two federal cases. And I may be confusing some of these facts because this is coming in so quickly that we probably will need tomorrow to try to get all of that sorted out. There is the lawyer that I mentioned who's both victim and lawyer. There's the lawyer who received the letter from the Oregon Department of Justice proposing this pre-indictment negotiation. there are the lawyers at the Hovitt firm who have had some involvement in this. We're not proposing to call Judge House, who is, I think, probably the most knowledgeable person associated with that representation. We're hoping that we can do that without the need to call her, but we're working on getting the notes that the state had promised quite some time ago have not arrived yet, and we've had some communication also with, the court may recall Nikki Jones, who is in the prosecutor's office here and now works at Lindsay Hart. She's been working with the Hovitt firm to try to get those notes and to try to get Ms. Jacobs' position with respect to those. We've gotten some conflicting, confusing information about whether and when those might be forthcoming.
All right, well, let me pause you for just a minute. So I will say, you know, given how quickly all of this is developing, and it's different, of course, for trial than it is for purposes of a motion, I will tell the state my inclination is to allow WebEx testimony for purposes of the motion where necessary. But if you have objections to particular people, I'm happy to hear it.
I totally understand. I think there's probably a point where we might even just agree to that anyway. I still haven't heard a name of any of these witnesses. She just referred to them by the profession.
I'm guessing that Ms. Weimiller may not know the names off the top of her head, but do you?
Well, I can do my best. I'm afraid I'll scramble them.
Let's do this instead. I think what my preference would be is after we go off record now, since everyone's here, maybe the attorneys can, maybe you can provide to the state the names of the people that you know that you've talked about.
There are some names, I think, in the
So
pleadings.
late, I can't remember, but I thought that I named many of those people in the facts section, and maybe that was happening late at night, but I think there are names.
I don't actually have it in front of me right now, so I can't, I have nothing to refer to. Let me see. Bear with me for a minute. Does the state have a copy of it right now?
We have it in our email.
I'll look in my email. And with this being the second motion, the request for sort of increased area of cross-examination that we're talking about? Or you're not sure?
I wish I had a better memory.
That's okay. I'll take a quick.
But there's one that has a very lengthy fact section, and I believe that I named.
Okay, I think what we're talking about is the motion in limine impeachment of jailhouse informant. I'm not going through the whole thing, but I do see that in the first few paragraphs it talks about an associated AUSA, Brian Bounds, and gives the name. It talks about Rhonda Slavic, the sister of Miss Jacobs' business partner, which sounds like the same person Miss Weimiller was just talking about. I guess what I would ask is that the sides compare notes to make sure the state has as many of those witnesses, their names and information as they can have.
And I can see just from my email that's blowing up that there are a lot of lawyers that we have to call as soon as we get out of here to try to figure out where we are. But I think that, especially after those calls, we'll be able to give the state a better idea.
Okay.
And Your Honor, I guess for purposes of just for purposes of the motion, I don't really have.
For the WebEx testimony?
Yeah,
I mean, I understand it's a different issue if we're talking about
Right.
now at trial.
100% different. So, I mean, I think we could commit to, for this purpose, we would agree to WebEx. I want to touch just on the issue of the notes and some of the directives that the court gave us. And to make sure it clarifies so that we can be prepared for tomorrow as well.
Sure.
If this court's expecting something from the state. I understood the directives to be to reach out to our law enforcement partners to determine if any agency had reached out to people within the jail in the female population to attempt to find an informant was one of the issues.
That was one, yeah.
We have done that. We've reached out to all law enforcement partners. They've all reported back to us that that was not done. No law enforcement agency went into the jail to search for an informant. And that was through MCSO, multiple deputies at MCSO that we believed would have information, and PPB. And of course, our office, which I've already relayed that we did not do that. I will say, I'm not sure if it was Miss Weinmiller or Miss Maxfield, sort of alleged that they had information that suggested we had done that. So we really tried to think about that, what that might have been. We certainly did not seek out any information. I do recall receiving a phone call from a defense attorney at some point, I think a year ago, who said she was representing a woman who was housed with Nancy. That was all she said. And my response was, of course, does she want to talk to us? And the response I got was no. That's the only thing I could think of. That was the end of the conversation. That's the only thing I could think of that they think they might have some information on, but we certainly haven't sought any information out. We haven't met with anybody. We didn't meet with that person that defense attorney had called me about. And that was the extent of it. So I think
what about the issue of, I think what was brought up when we had this conversation is defense indicated they thought there was some sort of investigation in Multnomah County into Miss Jacobs, and they thought it had to do with Medicaid, I believe, is what they were saying at the time. My recollection is the state was unaware of that, but I do think I directed the state to attempt to figure out whether or not such an investigation was taking place, because it may well not be part of your office, but some other branch of the state. So what has happened with that?
So we were not able to uncover anything. However, I'm blanking on his name. He's an AG, correct? Yeah. There's a AG had reached out to us, and I think we spoke with him yesterday or day before. And he said that there was a pre-indictment case. I don't recall what it was about, but a pre-indictment case that they were in negotiations with Miss Jacobs' attorney to settle pre-indictment. It hasn't happened yet. And it sounded like the terms of that were some sort of concurrent prison sentence. That was the extent of it. And oh, sorry, did you want to add
Well,
something?
I can add to that, Your Honor. My understanding is the reason the defense knows about that clearly. My understanding is the reason the defense knows about that clearly is because the DOJ had reached out to the defense listserv for an attorney. That there was an attorney appointed previously from MPD. That attorney no longer represents Ms. Jacobs. I don't know why or what happened. But in addition to that, the defense has subpoenaed the records from the DOJ. I believe the DOJ attorney was in contact with Ms. Maxfield at the break, but they have just filed a motion to quash. And I'm going to forward it to Ms. Liu. It doesn't look like the court was on that email, though they said they've just filed it.
All right, well, let me just say this. I'm not ruling on a motion to quash today, of course, but I would say that, if in fact, I don't know if there is or not, but now there's some understanding that there may be a pre-indictment resolution of the case. If in fact the pre-indictment resolution is that she is a deal or some sort of benefit contingent upon her willingness to provide information about other cases, that would clearly be Brady material. I realize you may not know, but I just want everyone to sort of understand the risk we're running if information is not provided to defense that in fact exists, whether or not the lawyers in the courtroom know of it.
And I think what you're saying, Your Honor, is that if that deal or something was premised on some sort of cooperation, is that what?
Well, I don't know I don't know anything about it either, and I think that's sort of the defense's point. They don't know if this witness is getting some sort of consideration for a willingness to provide information about other crimes or acts or...
Oh, other cases. You're not talking about this one.
Could be this case too. Could be any case, right?
Yeah. I can represent to the court there are no deals in place. We specifically have relayed to the DOJ. We're not in getting involved at all in what they're doing. It sounds like this deal was in place before we have even got involved. And we have made it very clear, we are not asking them to do anything. We're not suggesting anything. We didn't even engage in that conversation. We were steering far away from that. We're not getting involved in whether Ms. Jacobs receives anything in exchange for her testimony. She's not what we would classically call a jailhouse informant that we would bring in, meet with, proffer, sign up, give them a deal. That's not what we're doing. We're subpoenaing her as a witness. That's it. That is the extent of what we have done.
All right, well, I'm not making any rulings today.
Sure.
So we'll go off the record and, what?
There's one more thing. Sorry.
Yeah, okay.
At issue of the notes, we really want these notes ourselves. We've made every effort to get these notes.
Sure.
We don't have them. I mean, Ms. Jacobs holds all the cards when it comes to her attorney-client privilege.
I understand that.
And so,
I understand that the notes may well not be in the state's possession.
I just wanted to relay so everybody knows we're still attempting to get them. We want them. As soon as we have them in our possession, if and when that ever happens, we will immediately give them to defense counsel. And then, so I just want to make sure, Your Honor, is there something that we have been ordered to do that we have not complied with yet that you're expecting tomorrow?
Well,
besides what you maybe mentioned about the possible Brady material about some other deals.
right, and it's hard for me to know since I don't know exactly what's out there. And I understand, I guess what I'm trying to say is while I understand you're making a representation that the state has offered her no consideration for testimony against Ms. Brophy, I don't know what consideration the DOJ or AG's office has made or not made regarding what is leading to their resolution with her.
Okay.
So I don't know if that touches on this case or not. Even if you're not requesting it, I just don't know. So I can't say that there's anything I've ordered you to turn over that you haven't. I guess I'm encouraging a better understanding of what if there is some sort of pre-indictment deal in place, I think there needs to be a better understanding of what is leading to that, because even if it doesn't relate to Ms. Brophy, it's potentially Brady material for defense. I just don't know what it is right now, or if there even is any. I just don't know.
Okay, we'll reach out again
Okay.
and see what we can find out.
All right, let's go off the record.